The human prisoner. In the depths of the Andromeda Galaxy, the mighty Zortexian Empire held sway over countless star systems. King Zortex, a fierce and proud ruler, sat upon his obsidian throne, his eyes scanning the grand hall before him. The air was thick with the murmurs of courtiers and the clink of armor as the king's elite guards stood at attention. Zortex raised a hand, and a hush fell over the assembly. "Bring me a human," he commanded, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "My queen, Valeria, grows restless. She requires a new servant to attend to her needs." The guards bowed their heads in acknowledgement, their faces impassive beneath their helms. They marched from the hall, their footsteps ringing against the polished stone floor. Far across the galaxy, on the rugged outpost world of Taraxis, Jackson wiped the sweat from his brow as he tinkered with a battered cargo holder. The human colony was a hardscrabble existence, but Jackson had always been a survivor. Orphaned at a young age, he had learned to rely on his wits and his skills to get by. A sudden commotion outside drew his attention. Jackson set down his tools and stepped out into the harsh sunlight, shielding his eyes. A group of Zortexian soldiers, their armor gleaming, were marching down the main street of the colony, weapons at the ready. Jackson's heart raced as he watched the aliens approach. He knew of the Zortexian Empire, of course, everyone did. But to see their warriors here, on Taraxis, something was very wrong. The soldiers fanned out, their movements precise and coordinated. They began to round up the human colonists, herding them into the center of the settlement. Jackson's mind worked furiously as he tried to understand what was happening. And then the soldiers were upon him. Rough hands seized his arms, and he found himself being dragged towards a waiting transport ship. He struggled, but the Zortexians were too strong, their grip unyielding. As he was hauled aboard the vessel, Jackson caught a glimpse of his fellow colonists, their faces filled with fear and confusion. The ship's hatch sealed with a hiss, and Jackson was plunged into darkness. The journey to the heart of the Zortexian Empire passed in a blur of hyperspace jumps and curt commands from his captors. Jackson's mind raced as he tried to make sense of his situation. Why had he been taken? What did the Zortexians want with him? At last, the ship docked, and Jackson was dragged down a long, opulent corridor. The walls were adorned with intricate tapestries, and the floors were inlaid with precious metals. It was a far cry from the utilitarian simplicity of Taraxis. The guards brought Jackson to a halt outside a massive set of doors, emblazoned with the royal crest of the Zortexian Empire. The doors swung open, and Jackson found himself being marched into the throne room. King Zortex lounged upon his throne, his expression one of cold appraisal as he regarded the human prisoner. Beside him, Queen Valeria sat, her beauty otherworldly and achingly perfect. Jackson met the king's gaze, his jaw set in defiance. He would not cower before these aliens, no matter what they had in store for him. "You are to serve my queen," Zortex said, his voice laced with condescension. "You should consider it an honor, human." Jackson's eyes flicked to Valeria, and he felt a stirring of something he could not quite name. Fear, yes, but also curiosity. What secrets lay behind those fathomless eyes? As the guards led him away to begin his servitude, Jackson's mind was already racing, seeking a way out of this gilded cage. He would bide his time and learn what he could, and when the moment was right, he would seize his chance of freedom. But for now, he was a prisoner of the Zortexian Empire, forced to serve at the whims of an alien queen. The true test of his resilience and ingenuity was about to begin. Serving the queen. Jackson's first days in the service of Queen Valeria were a whirlwind of new experiences and challenges. The Zortexian palace was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, each more opulent than the last. As a lowly servant, Jackson was granted access to only a small portion of this vast complex, but even that was enough to leave him awestruck. His duties were varied and demanding. He was tasked with attending to the queen's every need, from fetching her meals to organizing her wardrobe. Valeria was a demanding mistress, quick to find fault and slow to offer praise. Jackson soon learned that the only way to survive in her service was to anticipate her desires and fulfill them before she even had to ask. Despite the constant pressure, Jackson found himself fascinated by the Zortexian culture. He observed the intricate rituals and customs of the court, the elaborate hierarchies and power struggles that played out behind closed doors. And he watched Valeria, trying to understand the enigmatic queen who held his fate in her hands. As the weeks turned into months, Jackson began to notice a change in the way Valeria treated him. Her commands became less harsh, her criticisms less frequent. Sometimes he even caught her watching him with a curious intensity, as though she were trying to peer inside his mind. One evening, as Jackson was tidying the Queen's chambers, Valeria suddenly spoke. "Tell me, human," she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "What do you make of your life here, in the heart of the Zortexian Empire?" Jackson paused, considering his answer carefully. "It is different from anything I have ever known," he said at last. "Your ways are strange to me, but I cannot deny that there is a certain beauty in them." Valeria raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Beauty," she repeated, an odd thing for a prisoner to say of his captors. "Perhaps," Jackson allowed, "but I have always believed that there is beauty to be found in the unknown, in the things that challenge us and force us to grow." The Queen regarded him thoughtfully for a long moment. "You are not like the other humans I have encountered," she said. "There is a strength in you, a resilience that intrigues me." Jackson felt a flush of pride at her words, but he kept his expression carefully neutral. "I am only trying to survive, my queen," he said, "as any creature would in my position." Valeria nodded, but there was a gleam in her eye that suggested she saw more than he was letting on. "Indeed," she murmured, "but I suspect there is more to you than mere survival instincts. I will be watching you closely, Jackson of Taraxis." With that, she dismissed him, leaving Jackson to ponder the implications of her words. He knew he was treading on dangerous ground, but he could not help but feel a thrill of excitement at the thought of winning the Queen's favor. As he went about his duties in the following days, Jackson threw himself into his work with renewed energy. He used his natural ingenuity to streamline the palace's systems, finding ways to conserve resources and boost efficiency. He even began to teach some of the other servants the skills he had learned on Taraxis, showing them how to repair broken equipment and improvise solutions to problems. Word of Jackson's resourcefulness began to spread through the palace, and soon even the king's advisors were seeking out his advice on technical matters. Valeria watched all of this with a growing sense of admiration, though she was careful never to show it openly. And so, a tentative respect began to grow between the human prisoner and the alien queen. It was a fragile thing, born of curiosity and circumstance, but it hinted at the possibility of something more. For Jackson, it was a glimmer of hope in an uncertain future. For Valeria, it was a chance to understand a species she had long dismissed as inferior. Neither of them could have predicted where this unlikely connection would lead them, or how it would shape the fate of an empire. But as they moved through the palace's halls, stealing glances and trading cryptic words, they both knew that something had shifted between them, and that nothing would ever be the same again. Secrets and betrayal. In the dimly lit corridors of the palace's lower levels, Jackson moved with a furtive urgency. He had been summoned to attend to a malfunctioning waste disposal unit, a task far beneath his current station. But as he navigated the twisting passageways, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. As he rounded a corner, he heard voices echoing from a nearby chamber. Curious, Jackson crept closer, straining to make out the words. What he heard sent a chill down his spine. The king suspects nothing. By the time he realizes what's happening, it will be too late. And what of the queen? She is not to be underestimated. Valeria is a fool, blinded by her own arrogance. She will fall along with her beloved king. Jackson's heart raced as he processed the implications of what he had overheard. A plot against the king and queen, a betrayal from within their own court. He knew he had to warn them, But who could he trust? His mind immediately went to Valeria. Over the past months, he had come to respect and even admire the enigmatic queen. The thought of harm coming to her filled him with a desperate urgency. Jackson waited until the conspirators had dispersed before slipping away, his mind churning with plans and possibilities. He knew he was taking a terrible risk by getting involved, but he could not stand idly by while treachery threatened the heart of the Empire. He made his way to Valeria's chambers, his steps hurried but cautious. When he finally stood before her, the queen's eyes widened in surprise at the sight of him. "Jackson," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "What brings you here at this hour?" "My queen," Jackson said, dropping to one knee. "I have urgent news. There is a plot against the king, a conspiracy within the palace walls." Valeria's face hardened, her eyes narrowing to slits. "Explain," she commanded. Jackson recounted what he had overheard, sparing no detail. As he spoke, he saw a flicker of fear in Valeria's eyes, quickly replaced by a burning determination. "You have done well to bring this to me," she said when he had finished. "But now we must act quickly. If what you say is true, then the king is in grave danger." She rose from her throne, her movements filled with a coiled grace. "Come," she said, beckoning Jackson to follow. "We must go to Zortex at once." As they raced through the palace's opulent halls, Jackson couldn't help but marvel at the change in Valeria. Gone was the cold, aloof queen he had first encountered. In her place was a fierce, determined warrior, ready to fight for her king and her empire. They burst into the king's chambers, startling Zortex from his contemplation. "My king," Valeria said, her voice urgent, "we have uncovered a plot against you. Your life is in danger." Zortex's eyes widened, then narrowed. "A plot?" he growled. "Who dares betray me?" As Valeria laid out the details of the conspiracy, Jackson saw a range of emotions play across the king's face. Shock, rage, and finally, a grim determination. "We will root out these traitors," Zortex declared, his voice a low rumble. "They will pay for their treachery with their lives." He turned to Jackson, his gaze assessing. "You have done a great service to the crown, human," he said. "You will be rewarded for your loyalty." Jackson bowed his head, feeling a rush of pride at the king's words. But even as he savored the moment, he knew that the true battle was yet to come. The palace was about to become a battlefield, a place of shadows and secrets where no one could be trusted, and Jackson, the once lowly human prisoner, would find himself at the very heart of the conflict. As he stood beside Valeria and Zortex, watching as they laid their plans for countering the conspiracy, Jackson felt a surge of purpose unlike anything he had ever known. He had found his place in this strange, alien world, and he would fight with everything he had to protect it. The betrayal had been uncovered, but the war for the Zortexian Empire was only just beginning. And Jackson, the human with a heart of fire, would be there to see it through to the end. The battle for the throne. The palace was in chaos. The once serene halls echoed with the clash of weapons and the shouts of combatants as the loyal guards of the king fought against the treacherous conspirators. Jackson raced through the fray, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind focused on one goal: protecting Valeria and Zortex. He had come a long way from the lowly prisoner he had once been. Now, armed with a pulse rifle and a fierce determination, he fought alongside the Zortexian warriors as if he had been born to it. His quick reflexes and keen eye, honed by years of survival on the harsh outpost world, served him well in the close quarters of the palace. Jackson ducked and wove through the fighting, his weapons spitting bursts of searing energy at the enemy. He saw a guard fall, overwhelmed by a group of attackers, and he leaped to the warrior's aid, dispatching the assailants with ruthless efficiency. As he paused to catch his breath, Jackson's eyes scanned the chaos, searching for Valeria. He had lost sight of her in the initial confusion of the attack, and a cold fear gripped his heart at the thought of her in danger. And then he saw her. The queen was a whirlwind of deadly grace, her energy blade flashing as she danced through the ranks of the conspirators. Jackson couldn't help but stare, transfixed by the terrible beauty of her fury. But even as he watched, he saw a group of assassins moving to flank her, their weapons aimed at her unprotected back. Without hesitation, Jackson charged forward, a battle cry tearing from his throat. He reached the assassins just as they were about to strike, his rifle blazing. The first two fell before they even realized he was there, but the third managed to get off a shot that seared across Jackson's shoulder, filling his nostrils with the stench of burning flesh. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Jackson struck back, his rifle butt smashing into the assassin's face with a sickening crunch. As the attacker crumpled, Jackson turned to face Valeria, ready to defend her with his last breath. But the Queen needed no defense. With a final decisive blow, she struck down the last of the conspirators, her energy blade humming with power. For a moment, she stood amid the carnage, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with a fierce light. Then she turned to Jackson, and her expression softened. "You're hurt," she said, her voice tinged with concern. Jackson glanced down at his shoulder, only now registering the searing pain of the wound. "It's nothing," he said, trying to sound nonchalant. "I've had worse." Valeria shook her head, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. "You're a stubborn one, Jackson of Tyraxis, but your bravery will not go unrewarded." Together, they made their way through the palace, rallying the remaining loyal guards and fighting their way to the king's chambers. They found Zortex there, blood-eyed but unbowed, his own energy blade still crackling in his hand. "It is over," the king said, his voice wary, but filled with grim satisfaction. "The traitors are defeated, and the Empire is saved." He turned to Jackson, his gaze appraising. "And we owe much of that victory to you, human. You've shown a courage and loyalty beyond anything I could have expected." Jackson bowed his head, feeling a rush of pride at the king's words. But even as he savored the moment, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The battle was won, but at what cost? The palace lay in ruins, its once grand halls now littered with the bodies of the fallen. And though the immediate threat had been quelled, Jackson knew that the roots of the conspiracy ran deep. There would be more challenges ahead, more enemies to face. But as he looked to Valeria and Zortex, he felt a fierce resolve settling over him. He had found his place in this strange, alien world, and he would fight to the last to defend it. No matter what threats arose, no matter what dangers loomed, he would stand with the Queen and the King, a human shield against the darkness. The battle for the throne had been won, but the war for the Zortexian Empire had only just begun, and Jackson, the once prisoner turned warrior, would be there to see it through, no matter the cost. A new alliance. In the days following the battle, a strange calm settled over the palace. The conspirators had been rooted out, their leaders executed, and their followers scattered to the far reaches of the empire. But even as the physical scars of the conflict began to fade, the emotional wounds would take longer to heal. Jackson found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. As word of his role in uncovering the conspiracy and defending the king and queen spread, he was hailed as a hero by the Zortexian people. Everywhere he went, he was met with looks of awe and gratitude, and even the most hardened warriors bowed their heads in respect as he passed. But for Jackson, the greatest reward was the change in his relationship with Valeria and Zortex. No longer was he seen as a mere servant or a curiosity. Now he was treated as an equal, a trusted advisor and confidant. He spent long hours in conference with the king and queen, discussing strategies for rebuilding the empire and strengthening its defenses against future threats. Zortex, once so dismissive of Jackson's human perspective, now listened intently to his ideas, nodding thoughtfully as he spoke. But it was his time with Valeria that Jackson cherished most. The queen had emerged from the battle with a new fire in her eyes, a determination to never again be caught off guard by those who would seek to harm her people. She threw herself into the work of ruling, and Jackson found himself at her side, offering support and counsel. In the quiet moments between the endless meetings and planning sessions, they would talk, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes for the future. Jackson spoke of his life on Taraxis, of the hardships he had endured, and the dreams he had nurtured in secret. And Valeria spoke of the weight of the crown, of the constant pressure to be strong, to never show weakness. As they talked, a bond began to form between them, a connection that went beyond mere friendship or alliance. They understood each other in a way that few others could, two outsiders who had found a home in the heart of an alien empire. But even as they grew closer, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that their newfound peace was fragile. The empire had been shaken to its core by the conspiracy, and there were still many who resented the idea of a human holding such influence in the Zortexian court. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens, Valeria voiced the fears that had been haunting Jackson's thoughts. "There are those who would see you removed from power," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "They fear the change you represent, the idea that a human could be equal to a Zortexian." Jackson nodded, his jaw tight. "I know," he said, "but I will not let their fear dictate my actions. I will continue to serve you and the king to the best of my ability, no matter the cost." Valeria turned to him, her expression softening. "I know you will," she said, "and I will stand with you, no matter what challenges we face." She reached out, her hand clasping his, and Jackson felt a surge of warmth at the contact. In that moment, he knew that whatever the future held, he would face it with Valeria at his side. As they stood there in the garden, the twin moons of the Zortexian homeworld rising overhead, Jackson felt a sense of purpose settling over him. He had found his place in this strange, alien world, and he would fight to the last to protect it. The battle for the throne had been won, but the struggle for the soul of the empire was only just beginning. And Jackson, the human who had risen from prisoner to hero, would be there to lead the charge, to forge a new path for both his people and the Zortexians. It would not be an easy road. There would be setbacks and challenges, enemies both old and new to face. But with Valeria and Zortex at his side, Jackson knew that anything was possible. A new alliance had been born, a bond between human and Zortexian that would shape the destiny of an empire. And Jackson, the once lost soul who had found his purpose among the stars, would be the one to lead them into the light. An unexpected connection. In the weeks that followed, Jackson and Valeria found themselves drawn ever closer together. What had begun as a tentative alliance, born of necessity and forged in the heat of battle, had blossomed into something deeper, more profound. They worked side by side, poring over ancient texts and star charts, seeking ways to strengthen the empire and protect its people. Jackson's quick mind and innovative thinking complemented Valeria's deep knowledge and strategic brilliance, and together they made a formidable team. But it was in the quiet moments, the stolen glances and lingering touches, that the true nature of their connection became clear. There was a spark between them, an undeniable pull that drew them together like stars caught in each other's gravity. For Valeria, Jackson represented a breath of fresh air, a chance to break free from the constraints of her royal duties and experience something real, something raw and unfiltered. In his eyes, she saw a reflection of herself, a kindred spirit who understood the burdens of leadership and the sacrifices it demanded. And for Jackson, Valeria was a revelation, a woman of fierce intelligence and unwavering strength, who challenged him to be more than he had ever dreamed possible. With her, he felt a sense of belonging, a deep connection that transcended the boundaries of species and culture. But even as they grew closer, they were keenly aware of the risks they were taking. Zortex watched their growing bond with a mixture of unease and jealousy, his once unshakable confidence in Valeria's loyalty now tinged with doubt. He had always known that his wife was a force to be reckoned with, a queen in every sense of the word. But seeing her with Jackson, seeing the way her eyes lit up when he entered the room, the way her laughter rang out clear and true in his presence, it stirred something dark and possessive in Zortex's heart. He began to distance himself from them, retreating into the shadows of the palace, his mind churning with dark thoughts and darker plans. He had fought too hard, sacrificed too much. to let a mere human steal away the woman he loved. Jackson sensed the growing tension, the way the air seemed to crackle with unspoken threats whenever Zortex was near. He knew that he was treading on dangerous ground, but his very presence in the palace was a challenge to the king's authority. But he could not bring himself to pull away from Valeria, could not imagine a life without her by his side. She was his anchor, his guiding star, and he would follow her to the ends of the universe if she asked. One night, as they sat together in the palace gardens, the twin moons casting a silvery glow of the lush foliage, Valeria turned to Jackson, her eyes shining with a fierce intensity. "I never thought I could feel this way," she whispered, her hand reaching out to caress his cheek. "I never thought I could love someone the way I love you." Jackson's heart swelled at her words, a rush of emotion so powerful it left him breathless. He pulled her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was both tender and desperately urgent. For a moment, the world fell away, and there was nothing but the two of them, lost in the magic of their connection. But even as they clung to each other, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that somewhere in the shadows, a dark presence lurked, waiting to tear them apart. He pulled back, his eyes searching Valeria's face, trying to memorize every curve and angle, every fleck of gold in her impossibly deep eyes. "I will never let anyone hurt you," he vowed, his voice raw with emotion. "I will fight for you, for us, until my last breath." Valeria smiled, a soft, sad smile that broke Jackson's heart, even as it filled him with a fierce determination. "I know you will," she whispered, "but I fear that the greatest threat to our love may come from within these very walls." She glanced up at the palace, its towering spires and gleaming domes casting long shadows across the gardens. "Zortex is not a man to be underestimated," she said softly. "And I fear that our happiness has come at a cost we may not be able to bear." Jackson felt a chill run down his spine at her words, a sense of foreboding that settled like a weight in the pit of his stomach. But even as the darkness closed in around them, he knew that he would not give up, would not let go of the love he had found against all odds. He pulled Valeria close once more, his lips brushing against her ear as he whispered a promise, a vow that he would keep until the stars themselves burned out. "I will never leave you," he said, his voice fierce with conviction. "No matter what happens, no matter what challenges we face, I will be by your side always." And as they held each other in the moonlit gardens, the scent of alien blossoms heavy in the air, Jackson knew that he had found something worth fighting for, something worth dying for. Love had bloomed in the heart of the Zortexian Empire, a love that defied the odds and challenged the very foundations of their society. And Jackson, the human who had dared to dream of a life beyond the stars, would fight to his last breath to protect it. The king's regret. The palace was quiet, the stillness broken only by the soft whisper of the night breeze through the towering spires. But beneath the calm surface, a storm was brewing, a tempest of emotion and betrayal that threatened to tear the very fabric of the empire apart. Zortex paced his chambers, his heart a maelstrom of rage and jealousy. He had seen the way Valeria looked at Jackson, had watched as their bond grew stronger with each passing day. And now, the very thought of them together, of his queen in the arms of another, filled him with a blinding, all-consuming fury. He had given her everything, had raised her up from a mere consort to a queen in her own right. And this was how she repaid him. By betraying him with a human, a creature so far beneath them it was laughable. No, he would not stand for it. He would not let this insult go unanswered. With a roar of rage, Zortex summoned his guards, his eyes blazing with a madness that bordered on the inhuman. "Bring me the human," he snarled, his voice a guttural growl. "Bring him to me, and I will show him the price of betrayal." The guards exchanged uneasy glances, but they dared not disobey their king. They bowed low and hurried from the room, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Jackson was in the gardens when they found him, his arms wrapped around Valeria, their foreheads touching as they whispered words of love and devotion. At the sight of the guards, they sprang apart, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. "The king demands your presence," one of the guards said, his voice cold and unyielding. "You are one of us now." Jackson's heart raced, his mind whirling with possibilities. He knew that Zortex had been growing increasingly unstable, his jealousy and paranoia consuming him like a cancer. But he had never imagined that it would come to this, that the king would dare to threaten him so openly. He glanced at Valeria, saw the terror in her eyes, and felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it took his breath away. "I will go with you," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that clawed at his throat. "But I will not let him hurt Valeria. I will not let him destroy what we have built." The guard said nothing, merely motioned for him to follow. Jackson squeezed Valeria's hand one last time, trying to pour all his love and reassurance into that single touch before turning to face his fate. The throne room was dark, the only light coming from the flickering torches that lined the walls. Zortex sat upon his throne, his eyes glittering with malice, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm against the armrest. "Kneel," he commanded, his voice a whip crack in the silence. "Kneel before your king, human." Jackson stood tall, his chin lifted in defiance. "I kneel before no one," he said, his voice ringing with courage he barely felt. "I am a free man, and I will not bow to a tyrant." Zortex's face twisted with rage, his hand clenching into a fist. "You dare defy me?" He roared, rising from his throne in a swirl of black robes. "You, who have stolen my wife, my queen, my very heart." He advanced on Jackson, his eyes blazing with a madness that was terrifying to behold. "I will teach you the price of defiance," he hissed, his hand reaching for the energy blade at his side. "I will make you suffer as I have suffered, and then I will cast your broken body to the dogs." But before he could strike, a voice rang out through the throne room, a voice that was both commanding and infinitely tender. "Stop." Valeria stood in the doorway, her eyes blazing with a light that was almost blinding in its intensity. She strode forward, her head held high, her gaze locked on Zortex. "You will not touch him," she said, her voice a clarion call in the darkness. "You will not harm the man I love, the man who has saved us all." Zortex stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. "Love," he spat, the word dripping with venom. "You dare speak of love when you have betrayed me so utterly." Valeria shook her head, her expression softening with a sadness that cut Jackson to the core. "It is not betrayal to follow one's heart," she said softly. "It is not betrayal to choose happiness, to choose a love that is pure and true." She turned to Jackson, her eyes shining the love that took his breath away. "I choose you," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "I choose a future with you, a future where our love can flourish and grow." Zortex stared at them, his face a mask of rage and despair. For a long moment, the throne room was silent, the only sound the ragged gasps of the king's breathing. And then, with a suddenness that shocked them all, Zortex crumpled to his knees, his head bowed in defeat. "I have been a fool," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "I have let my jealousy and my pride blind me to the truth." He looked up at Valeria and Jackson, his eyes glistening with tears. "You have shown me what it means to love," he said softly. "You have shown me the power of a bond that transcends all boundaries, all fears." He rose to his feet, his shoulders squared with a newfound resolve. "I cannot stand in the way of such a love," he said, his voice ringing with a quiet dignity. "I cannot be the one to destroy the very thing that gives our empire hope." He turned to Valeria, his expression one of deep regret. "Forgive me, my queen," he said softly. "Forgive me for my blindness, for my cruelty." Valeria stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch Zortex's cheek. "There is nothing to forgive," she whispered. "We have all been blind in our own ways. But now we have a chance to see clearly, to build a future that is brighter than any we have ever known." Zortex nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "And that future belongs to you," he said, his gaze encompassing both Valeria and Jackson. "To the queen who dared to love, and the human who dared to dream." He stepped back, his head bowed in reverence. "The empire is yours," he said softly. "May you lead it with wisdom, with compassion, and with the love that has brought us to this moment." Jackson felt a rush of emotion so powerful it left him breathless. He reached out, his hand finding Valeria's, their fingers intertwining in a bond that was unbreakable. Together, they stepped forward, ready to face the future, ready to lead the Zoltexian Empire into a new era of peace and prosperity. And as they walked out into the dawning light, Jackson knew that their story would be remembered for generations to come. A story of love, of courage, of the power of the human spirit to overcome even the greatest of odds. A story that would inspire countless others to reach for the stars, to dream of a better tomorrow. And as they stepped into the waiting crowd, the cheers of the Zoltexian people ringing in their ears, Jackson knew that he had found his home, his purpose, his destiny. For he was Jackson, the human who had risen from the depths of obscurity to become a king, a legend, a shining beacon of hope for all the galaxy to follow. And with Valeria by his side, he knew that nothing, not even the vastness of space itself, could stand in their way.